What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports. You're watching our college football channel. We're going to give you a schedule preview and projected record here for the Kentucky Wildcats. Before we get to the 2024 schedule, let's look back at 2023. Here was the schedule from last season for Kentucky, and you can see 5 losses: Georgia, Missouri, Tennessee, Alabama, and South Carolina. So lost to the 4 teams that wound up in the top 25, and then South Carolina. But they did beat Louisville. That was a huge win at the end of the season for them. And it's the same schedule every year as far as the non-conference. They're going to play 3 cupcakes, and they're going to play Louisville. And that's the same thing in 2024. That's what you see here on this schedule. You look at the non-conference. It's Southern Miss, Ohio, Murray State, and Louisville. I can't remember, and maybe I'm not remembering correctly, but I can't remember the last time that Kentucky played a quality non-conference game outside of that Louisville game. And, I don't blame them. If you got Louisville, a Power 5 opponent on the schedule, why would you play another one and when you're a team like Kentucky? Because it's not like you're a powerhouse. So it makes sense to me why they would not schedule these teams. But you maybe like to see Kentucky go out and play one of these better non-conference games outside of Louisville. But, Ohio and Southern Miss are not terrible Group of 5 teams. So those could be somewhat interesting games. You look at the home schedule. Southern Miss, Ohio, Murray State, Louisville, just showed you this. So all 4 of their non-conference games are at home. Then they get South Carolina, Georgia, Vanderbilt, and Auburn. Georgia, that's going to be a tough one, obviously. But South Carolina, Vandy, and Auburn, all games that they can win at home. And right there, you look at those 3 games, and if they win their 3 cupcake non-conference games, they're already to a bowl game. So, again, that's kind of why you maybe don't schedule the tough non-conference schedule. But this road schedule is brutal. Take a look. At Ole Miss, at Florida, at Tennessee, at Texas. So you're talking about Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Texas, probably 3 of the top 7 or 8 teams in the SEC. You got to play all of them on the road. And then Florida is always a tough place to play. That is a very, very tough road schedule for Kentucky this season. That's overall the schedule may not be too bad, but road schedule, it might be the toughest in the SEC. And maybe we'll come back and do some rankings there to look at the home and road schedules. But this is this full schedule again. They open up with Southern Miss on August the 31st. Then it's right into SEC play, South Carolina on the 7th, and then Georgia after that on the 14th. They play Ohio on September 21st. So the first 4 games all at home. You've got 2 easier Group of 5 opponents, and then you've got 2 SEC games. We'll know a lot about Kentucky. A lot of times it seems like they'll play maybe 1 SEC game and then they'll play all their other cupcake games early. But by the time we get to week 5, they would have already played both South Carolina and Georgia. So we'll know a lot about Kentucky by that time. And even more once we get to the end of September. They play Ole Miss on the road on September 28th. That'll be their first road game. That'll obviously be a tough one. They get a bye week after that, and it would, I think, help Kentucky more to maybe have that bye week before Ole Miss instead of after them. But again, I guess it gives them a chance to recover after that game, which should be a very tough one. They come back and get Vanderbilt. Should be a fairly easy game there on October the 12th. Then it's back on the road at Florida on the 19th. Then back home for Auburn on the 26th. So they've got their schedule staggered really well. It's home away, home away. Don't have any back-to-back road games. They play Tennessee on the road on November 2nd, and then they get a bye week. So it's just like we saw at the top of the schedule, the first bye week. After playing a tough road game, they get a bye week instead of maybe before that tough road game, which is interesting. I don't think that really helps you out too much, but they play Murray State. Who do you want to play after a bye week? Do you want to play Ole Miss and Tennessee, or do you want to play Vanderbilt and Murray State? So I don't really like the bye weeks here for Kentucky. Unless you could look at it and say, well, Vanderbilt's not a bye week, but Murray State's basically like a bye week, so you get 2 weeks almost to prepare for Texas. I guess you could look at it that way. But Texas on the road there on the 23rd, obviously going to be a tough one, and they'll close things out with Louisville on November 30th. So like I said, if you take care of business at home in those games outside of the Georgia game and you win the 3 easier non-conference games, a bowl game looks to be fairly easy for Kentucky. But that road schedule, man, it is tough. Ole Miss, Florida, Tennessee, Texas. Then you've also got Louisville, who's a rivalry game. I know Kentucky's gotten the better of them in recent years, but that one could be a tough one as well. So overall, it's not a super tough schedule because the non-conference is not that bad, but they do play several of the top teams in the SEC, and they have a very tough road schedule So all in all, a pretty tough schedule for Kentucky in 2024. Here were some of the projections from last season. Kentucky, of course, going 7-5. They were projected to go 8-4. I predicted them to go 8-4. And Athlon Sports predicted them to go 8-4. The over/under was only 6.5, so that was a really easy over. This team, again, expected to maybe be 8-4. They did go 7-5, but still that 7-5 was over the 6.5. So Vegas was not high on Kentucky last year, and they did wind up a little bit under, again, what we predicted them to do, but still 7-5, right there, close to the 8-4. Again, this is the schedule, and this is the scale that we'll use for the projection. If it's less than 20 or over 80, those are pretty much guaranteed wins or losses. 20-29, 71-80, those are games where I think the spread's going to be double digits. A game where a team should win. Of course, upsets in this category do sometimes happen, but they should win. 30-39, 61-70. Those are games where I think the spread's going to be closer to a touchdown. Games where there's definitely going to be a favorite, but that favorite is could definitely lose, and they'll lose a lot of these types of games. And then your 50-50 games will stay in the white. Those are in the 40 to 60% range. Games where I think the spread will be 5 points or less, and games that really could go either way. So for Kentucky, the good news is, once again, they'll have 3 easy wins: Southern Miss, Ohio, and Murray State. And again, that's just kind of how they do their schedule. They play 3 easy opponents, and then they'll play Louisville in the non-conference, and that's just what it is every single year for Kentucky. I can't remember the last time they played a quality non-conference game outside of that game against Louisville. So you've got the 3 easy wins, and then we'll go to games where I think they're going to be favored by probably double digits. That's Vanderbilt. They are clearly better than Vanderbilt, plus they get that game at home. You put all that together, and yeah, Kentucky should be favored by 14 to 16 points in that game. And then we'll go to other games where I think they'll be favored. I think that's South Carolina. I think they'll be favored by about a touchdown. I do have Kentucky in a tier just ahead of South Carolina, plus the home field advantage. That's enough to make this one in the purple here. And again, I think Kentucky should be favored by about a touchdown against the Gamecocks. All right, so those are the games they'll be favored in, and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 games where they should clearly be favorites. I mean, 7 games where they could be underdogs, or these could be, again, games that could go either way. We will start with the games that I think there'll be a slight underdog. That's Georgia and Tennessee. Now, this Georgia one's a little bit tricky. I think this probably should really be in the orange, but again, just using the scale and the formula, because the game's at home, Kentucky has just enough to they're 2 tiers below Georgia, but the home field advantage puts them kind of just 1 tier behind Georgia in this specific game, and that's why this game winds up in the yellow. Hopefully that makes sense. But anyways, I personally think Georgia should be able to handle this one fairly easily, but again, the formula that we use, this game does wind up in the yellow. And I can go ahead and tell you, if it was in the orange, it would not change the projection at the end. So keep that in mind. But Tennessee, that'll be a tough one for Kentucky. It's on the road. I think they will definitely be an underdog in that one. And that one possibly might even be in the orange as well. It just depends on how good Tennessee turns out to be, because that's a tough place to play. And I think Tennessee will definitely be better than Kentucky. But with our formula, again, that one does come out in the yellow. Ole Miss and Texas, those games come out to be games here in the orange. I've got Ole Miss and Texas kind of in that top tier along with Georgia, but these games are on the road, and that's the difference between these 2 games in Georgia. Even though, personally, I think Kentucky probably has a better shot of beating Ole Miss than they do beating Georgia, but that's why these are not predictions. This is just a formula that we put out there, and we get the projection. I'll do my predictions later, and who knows, maybe I'll pick them to upset Ole Miss, but I'll go ahead and tell you right now, I'm not going to pick them to beat Georgia. And again, I feel much more confident that Georgia will beat Kentucky than I do Ole Miss. Anyways, that'll leave 3 games: Florida, Auburn, Louisville. These are your 50-50 games. Louisville doesn't feel like a 50-50 game, especially playing at home for Kentucky, but these teams are in similar tiers. And again, Kentucky's kind of owned this series as of late, but it's one that Louisville, just comparing the teams, has a real shot to win. Louisville, I think, might actually be the better team. It's close, but home field advantage for Kentucky. I think they will be favored by at least a field goal in this one. Auburn is a tough one. I think Kentucky probably favored there just because it's at home. And then Florida, that one I don't know. I think Kentucky probably a little bit better than Florida, but that's a tough place to play. Probably the home field advantage does swing that to Florida, and I'd say they'll be favored by by 2 or 3 points, but not by much. So those are your 3 50-50 games. If they lose to Georgia, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Texas, and you lose all 3 of these, yeah, that's not good. That's not going to be a bowl game. But if you win all 3, you're 8-4, have a pretty good season. If you win 2 of them, you know, you're back to 7-5. You only win 1, you still get to a bowl game. So you feel good about Kentucky at least getting to a bowl game. But when we average everything out, the projection does come out to 7-5. So a 7-5 projected record for Kentucky, just the same record as last year. Projection a little bit lower than last year with a tougher conference schedule. And again, you add in Ole Miss, you add in Texas. This is a pretty tough conference schedule, even though the non-conference schedule not bad. But again, 7-5, that's the projection for Kentucky in 2024. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Give me your thoughts, your projections on this team down in the comments below.